I've got my gear on to watch Bruins. This morning, Rask is the starter. Elliott wasn't confirmed at the time that I was writing all this down. 11-8-4, 8-10-7. That tells a story, doesn't it? So for Bruins fans today, this is a big game, in that we're going into Philly. It's a morning game, which you never know what you might get. You might get something boring where both teams are apparently still asleep and maybe they think it's the morning practice, or you might get a game that's really sloppy and a lot of goals get scored. With Rask and Elliott, I'm more likely to bet on a lot of goals getting scored, and I may not be wearing a Bruins jersey by the end of the game. I might be wearing something else and pretending I didn't see what happened. The biggest names in terms of players who aren't playing in the game for the Bruins is Krejci, and for the Flyers is Gudas. I came up with this idea of just putting in who's not playing, and it may be due to suspension with Gudas and a couple others, or maybe due to injury. But the biggest names that aren't in the game, to me, show who the healthier teams are. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So let's look at Minnesota and St. Louis. Minnesota and St. Louis, a matchup between two old rivals from 1967, going back to the Minnesota North Stars and St. Louis Blues. The Blues come in 17-8-1. Minnesota comes in 12-10-3. They haven't confirmed their goalies. It's probably Allen and Dubnyk. The biggest name out for St. Louis, of course, Robbie Fabry, who's not playing all year. Spurgeon for Minnesota is the biggest name. I put him ahead of Parise because we all can kind of agree Parise isn't the player he used to be. And you never know if Parise's going to play at all. Spurgeon, on the other hand, has been solid for Minnesota. And they miss him on the blue line because, you know, top four defensemen aren't all that easy to find. Minnesota's, again, they need to go on a little bit of a streak here to catch up to these teams. For instance, Minnesota's got 35 points. They're currently sitting with 27. They win this game tonight, they're only 6 points back. They lose this game tonight in regulation, they're 10 points back. Big swing there. New Jersey's in Arizona. Kincaid is starting. Wedgwood's highly likely. I can't see him going with anybody else. It's telling that Palmieri is still on the injured list. I haven't heard when he'll be back. I think it's a couple more weeks. And yet they're 15-6-4. New Jersey's playing well. It hasn't seemed to be that big of a deal when players get injured for New Jersey this year, as much as we all admire what Vegas has been able to do with all their goalies out. Jersey has missed players much the same as Anaheim, though not quite at the level Anaheim's at right now, but we'll get to that later. And yet, New Jersey's managed to keep a relatively solid record together. And remember, a lot of the guys who've played every game are rookies, so they got a lot of kids in that lineup. It's a very impressive record. And I don't know where to start. I guess, you know, they're on another losing streak. Wedgwood's likely the starter because Ronta's hurt. 6-18-4. It's not as ugly as it's been. That's how much fun it is for Arizona right now. That is not as ugly as it has been. It has been a lot worse than that. Detroit. So Detroit's coming off of a loss to Montreal. Now they got to play Montreal. They're 10-11-5. It's likely Howard, likely Price. I can't see anybody but Price starting this game, honestly. The interesting thing to me is Montreal's now 500. They're 12-12-3. They're 500. The biggest name that's still listed as injured, Drouin, who's day-to-day. Witkowski is the biggest name I see for Detroit, and he's suspended. The only other name on their list is Johan Franzen, and he's never playing again. So Detroit doesn't have injuries to blame for this. This is just a matter of, I don't know, I said with Vegas I saw a market correction. Maybe that's what this is for Detroit too. But it is a good run that Montreal's on, and since they beat Detroit 6-3 once already, I don't know. Maybe Detroit comes into Montreal tonight and exacts revenge, but I do have my doubts that that's going to happen. Just small doubts. Columbus. So last night, Columbus beat Anaheim. People mentioned that I didn't really talk about it in last night's review. I didn't really see any of it. I saw like 2 minutes of it. I didn't really have anything to add to the score. Score was on the board, and it's like, all right, well, that's all I got for you guys. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Now, Columbus today is in Washington in a meeting of the most patriotic-looking logos in the NHL. A lot of stars, a lot of stripes, a lot of red, white, and blue. And it should be a patriotic-looking game. Bobrovsky and Holtby have been confirmed. 17-8-1 is the record for Columbus. 14-11-1 for Washington. The biggest names that are hurt, Ryan Murray. Remember him? It doesn't matter. Ryan Murray for Columbus is on the IR. Outside of that, Columbus is a very healthy team. And Washington's only missing Burakovsky at this stage. He's the only guy listed as being injured. So once he comes back, Washington's a healthy team. And it is interesting to see how some of the healthy teams are doing really, really well. And I say some because Detroit's healthy and it hasn't helped them. So Detroit just has to be that team that's different. Why can't you be the same as the other healthy teams? Toronto and Vancouver. So this, of course, is a matchup where Toronto fans will outnumber Vancouver fans in that game, even though it's in Vancouver. Vancouver had a 3-3 road trip. They salvaged the road trip with the win in Nashville, but they're still facing an uphill battle. Their goaltenders have become ordinary. They can score. The Sedins have started looking like the Sedins, and Besser it is a machine when he's on. But here's the thing. Toronto comes in and they can score. They have no injuries. Vancouver, Sutter's the biggest name they're missing. Goodbranson's the only other one they're missing. Toronto 17-9-1. Vancouver's 12-10-4. This could be an ugly game. I'm going to be honest. The Canucks, this is their first game home off of a 6-game road trip. First game home off a long road trip is infamous. Almost anybody who's played in the NHL, I didn't, but I always hear it on TV and I always see it in print. The first game home off a long road trip is really hard. It is really hard to get up for that game. If this game is tied after one, Toronto's going to win it. I have no doubt in my mind. Toronto's coming in with all the momentum in the world. They're coming in with all the confidence in the world. And I really think that this game could get ugly. Nelson, is likely. Anderson's likely. Anderson's playing better of the two. Nilsson, maybe he stands on his head in this game. He's overdue to do that again, but I don't want to wager money on that. And Toronto has started making a meal of Vancouver in recent meetings. So I don't know that tonight's going to change that. And Toronto had a good record against Vancouver even when they weren't a good team. So there is something to be said for this this road team home ice advantage that Toronto enjoys in Canada. It got them through, it helps. It definitely helps when they're on the road and most of the fans are cheering for them. Because it psychologically deflates their opposition. So we'll see if that happens tonight. And we'll see if the Canucks can eke out a win here, or maybe they catch Toronto napping because Toronto's looking for a clean sweep of Western Canada and overlooks the Canucks. I don't know, but it's a reach. Put it that way, it's a reach. San Jose and Tampa. So the Sharks are one of those tweener teams. They're one of those teams that I know should be in the playoffs, but they're not a team that I look at and say, oh, they're going to win a Stanley Cup. Tampa, on the other hand, is a team that really, to me, looks like just a juggernaut. San Jose's 14-8-2, so they're playing very well. Tampa's playing iffy. They're 17-6-2. They've been iffy their last 5 games. And depending on tonight's game, the power rankings could be very, very, very different than they were as recently as 2 weeks ago. When I was saying, hey, is there a number higher than 1 that they could go to? Because they're just so much better than everybody else. Not anymore. Vasilevsky's been confirmed. Jones is likely. The biggest names on the injured list, Paul Martin's on the IR for San Jose. He's another one of those when's he coming backs. And Coburn for Tampa is the biggest name I could come up with. So you don't look at Coburn and say, well, that's why Tampa's been struggling, because without Coburn. And Coburn just went out recently. So Tampa's not a team that you look at and say, well, it's injuries. So they should be able to turn it around, and it should start as soon as tonight. I will say that with San Jose's road jerseys and Tampa's home jerseys, it will be a very attractive game to watch. Be a very nice jersey combination going on there. And now we get to the fun stuff. Buffalo and Pittsburgh. Oh, Buffalo. You know, right now, Arizona fans are very happy to see Buffalo. They're the team that keeps them out of 31st in the power rankings. They're the team that makes sure that, for right now, they're not talked about as the worst team in the league. And I'm not sure that I understand what part of Buffalo's game has gone so horribly wrong. But I think whatever you would say it is, offense, defense, goaltending, right now the answer is probably yes. Coaching, on some level, yes. Absolutely. This is a disaster. 6-16-4, so they've won 6 out of 26 games. They go into Pittsburgh to play a team that just beat them 4-0. Jari, they haven't confirmed him, but he'll play. Jari's going to play until his legs fall off. Or until Murray gets back, whatever happens first. Johnson hasn't been confirmed by Buffalo. I don't think it matters. I don't. This is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh looked like Pittsburgh last night. And the 34 saves by Jari. That this kid is excellent. And yet, I will say this. Because of the fact Buffalo's won 6 out of 26, I wouldn't be surprised if Jari sat and they play his backup. Wouldn't surprise me. Fadoon's the biggest name in terms of injuries on Buffalo, so they don't have that to fall back on. Murray is the biggest name, of course, for Pittsburgh, and it's interesting that Matt Murray and Ryan Murray are both hurt at the same time. I'm not saying that these two guys are hanging out in Vegas together, gambling or anything, but I'm not saying they're not. So just let that sink in. We're up to the 9th game of the night. It's a lot. Chicago and Dallas. So the Blackhawks are flirting with being back to in the playoff conversation. It's perilous. Again, the Central is a perilous division. Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville. That's likely your top 3. Barring some disastrous result by one of those 3 teams, that's your top 3. You have everybody else fighting for 4th and 5th. Colorado still is not out of the mix for that 5th spot. The setback against New Jersey last night doesn't help, but they're still in that running. Minnesota's still right there. Minnesota wins tonight. Chicago loses tonight. Suddenly we're talking about how Minnesota is in that spot. And Chicago, well, they would have lost an opportunity to beat Dallas. So these games are key. For Dallas, this is key. Any kind of consistency from Dallas right now, that 4th spot is there for the taking in the division. And you can lock it down as soon as the end of this month if you have a good month. Because there's so many teams behind you that are beating each other up and maintaining near 500 records. If you can go on a run as Dallas, maybe it's a 4-horse race at the top, and then you have 3 teams fighting for 5th in the division. And that 5th spot is highly likely, in my mind, to be that second wild card. I'd be very surprised if a Pacific Division team in 4th place finishes with more points than a 5th place team in the Central. That would be really a shocking move. But Thought's the biggest name out for Dallas. It hasn't adversely affected their defense not having them, to be completely honest. Because their defense has been very scattered all season. In terms of results, you never know. It's like you're rolling the dice every time with their defense and their goaltending. You just never know what you're getting. Bishop's confirmed. Forsberg's highly likely. I can't see Forsberg not starting. And at the same time, Chicago with Crawford on the IR. Hawks fans are panicked, and rightfully so. Corey Crawford has been having a fantastic season. One of those years that makes you think, hey, is this guy finally going to win a Vezina? And now he's hurt. He's on the injured reserve. And you have to wonder if this is going to derail not just Crawford's chances, but Chicago's. There's a big drop from Crawford to Forsberg. And that big drop could cause this team to be out of contention as soon as the end of this month. It's just too much work. If you fall behind, if these guys fall to 6th in that division, and they got to climb over teams, and if they're 5 or 6 points back of the team in front of them, it's just too much. It's a lot of work. So that if you achieve that goal and go on this incredible second half, you're exhausted by the time the playoffs roll around. I've seen teams go on these great second halves and then just nothing happens in the playoffs because they did everything they could to get there. They gave every ounce of everything they had to get there. And then the playoffs roll around, they're beat up, they're tired, they're sore, and they just don't have the energy the team they're against has, who's had a little bit of an easier time. Maybe they've rested their stars a little bit down the stretch. Maybe they've allowed some games to get away from them because, you know, they're waiting for the playoffs. Happens. I'd rather not see it happen to Chicago. Forsberg has to prove the doubters wrong. I'm one of the doubters. I have not been an Anton Forsberg fan. And that's just, you know, me being honest. Okay, Florida and Carolina. So Florida, well, 10-13-2. Reimer's the likely starter. Ward's the likely starter for Carolina. 10-9-5. We can call this the Disappointment Cup. This is a matchup between two teams that, in Florida's case, coming out of winning their first division title a year and a half ago, expected to get better. They revamped their defense. That was considered to be their problem. They revamped it. They had everything set. They figured they were going to get better. And then it all fell apart. And this season, it hasn't really turned around for them. The IR for Florida, Dadonov, is their IR. And while that hurts, I don't look at that and say, well, that's a fatal flaw, because they have young depth to come in. Melgen's a guy that I was a big fan of last year, and a good example of a guy who can come in and play a more prominent role than I think people figured he could before he came over. Or before he came up, I should say. Came over. Stempniak is the only name on the Carolina IR. So Carolina does not have an excuse. Carolina doesn't have anything that they can look at and say, oh, well, you know, we lost Aho and we lost Hannafin and Darling's been hurting. Nope, there's nothing really there other than Carolina just hasn't been good enough. And this is a season where they were supposed to get better. This is a season where Carolina was supposed to be a playoff team. So it really is the Disappointment Cup between these two teams. And that just proves I always have more to say about the lesser lights in the NHL than the higher-up teams. Because higher-up teams, there's not really a whole lot to say. Other than they're awesome. You know, St. Louis, good season. Columbus, good season. Nashville, Islanders, Jets, sure, all of them. Okay. Speaking of which, let's talk about one of those lesser lights, which is Anaheim, which is a surprise to me, and one of those favorites, which is Nashville. Now, Miller is likely. Rinne is likely. I can't see them going with Gibson again. The shooting gallery needs to rotate its goalies a little bit. Nashville's 11-11-4. That loss last night hurts. Nashville's 15-7-3. For Anaheim, I put down they're missing everyone. And for Nashville, it's Ryan Ellis. Anaheim is a sad story. It is. And it's I would love to revel in it. I'd love to. But as much as I could revel in their misery, I can't. I'm not sure why that is either. But this team really needs results now. They made the Vatanen for Henrique trade, which looks like a good move for them and should solidify their offense. Henrique is overrated, and I've seen that where people say he's overrated. Offensively, he is overrated. As an all-around player, he's a very good second/third line forward. He's a useful utility guy. He's the kind of guy that definitely will help them the idea is once everybody's healthy, he'd likely drop to either second winger or third line center or third line winger. They'll move guys around. Vermette's very useful as a utility guy as well. So there's a lot of good pieces in Anaheim, but everybody's hurt. So as long as everybody's hurt, it's highly likely Nashville wins this game. Highly, highly likely. Very unlikely that this is the day where Anaheim turns it around. And yet, this is why they play the games. And the Battle of Alberta. Battle of Alberta goes back decades. We all know that. And it's a battle that the Oilers dominated in the 80s. It was kind of a saw-off in the 90s, or well, early 90s especially, where both teams were in financial trouble. Both teams were in trouble with their product on the ice. And the financial troubles, the funny thing is, we have this Battle of Alberta we take for granted. The idea of Edmonton or Calgary possibly leaving the country was very real in the early 90s. And then, once Quebec and Winnipeg had moved on, there was a feeling of, all right, well, Calgary's probably next, or Edmonton, one or the other. So when we look at this matchup tonight, it is a matchup of the 10-14-2 Oilers and the 14-10-1 Flames. Brossoit is the likely starter. Smith's the likely starter for Calgary. And with Talbot on the injured reserve list and Versteeg being the biggest name for Calgary, this game favors Calgary. So fast forward. We get past the 90s. We get into the 2000s. Calgary's the better team for a lot of that decade. A lot of it is because Edmonton has just been awful for this past decade, and the early 2000s weren't necessarily great for them either. They had that Stanley Cup final run, but I digress. 05-06 was a good year to be an Edmonton fan. Outside of that, and then, of course, in 2004, Calgary had the run to the Stanley Cup final, which there was some kind of a goal thing or some kind of controversy. Everybody's forgotten, I think. Anyhow, Brossoit as the starter in Edmonton, well, Talbot can come off the IR as soon as on the 5th. And I think Edmonton fans are really going to want Talbot back. The sad thing is Talbot hasn't been Talbot this year. His numbers this year are the worst numbers he's put up in his career. And I don't know what it is that's been causing it, but Talbot has not been good for Edmonton. I know their defense hasn't been great either. And everybody talks about Edmonton's defense, and I think part of it is because, yes, that Edmonton defense needs help. But I think it's also kind of the easy thing to do. Their forward depth hasn't exactly distinguished them from the rest of the pack. And I look at a guy like, for instance, Drake Caggiula, one of those middle of the road guys who was supposed to take a step forward, and really hasn't offensively. Zach Kassian, I believe he's still sitting at 1 goal right now. There's a lot of things to look at in Edmonton, and the weird part is, on the first night of the year, Edmonton beats Calgary. It's a slaughter. McDavid gets a hat trick. And the headline coming out of that was just how good the Oilers were and how maybe the Flames getting Hamonic won't help them at all. This defense doesn't look any better. Maybe Hamonic isn't an improvement. Well, what a difference a couple of months makes, because right now they have mirroring records and Calgary has the better record. And if the Flames can come out tonight and really put a stomping on Edmonton, it solidifies Calgary in terms of their position in the division, their position as a potential contender in the West, and it kind of further buries Edmonton. Now, I've given up on any hope of the Oilers making the playoffs myself. I think hope might be the wrong word. Anyways, I really believe that the Oilers were going to take a step forward this year. I didn't see them as a Stanley Cup champion by any stretch. But this is completely unexpected. Can they turn it around? I guess anything's possible. But it's highly unlikely. And the Flames can really stomp them tonight. It should be a very spirited game. I would look for guys like Maroon, Lucic, and Kassian to stir things up early. And I would look over on the Calgary side and see if Ferland answers and some of the other big boys for Calgary answer as well. I would also look to see if Matt Tkachuk is agitating at his best, and if Lucic and Cassian are trying to do the same for Edmonton. I'm just saying this could be a really chippy game. This could be one of those games that goes on for a while due to penalties, fights, and everything else. And it could also be one of those Game of the Year candidates. So let me know what you guys think. Who do you think is going to win all these games? There's 12 of them. It's a lot to go over. I apologize for the length of said video. But again, it's 12 games. And that's a lot to take in. And then after these 24 teams have played, I get to adjust my board, which gets more and more difficult every day. And then I get to do the power rankings tonight. And then we'll see who the power in the NHL really is. I'm just joshing you. It changes every week. It's just for fun. It really is. It's for fun. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and I'll talk to you again soon.